The galaxy burned with 1,000,000,000 wars, and not one of them mattered to the dying world of Korova. Once, this planet had been a jewel of human advancement. Orbital platforms that kissed the void, cities that gleamed with technology that would make even the Mechanicus pause in suspicious wonder. Once, Korova had been home to millions who never bowed to old night's darkness, who held the line when the galaxy tore itself apart. Once, Andros had been born here, a child of this world's last desperate hope, engineered in gene labs by parents who knew the Xenos were coming and that humanity needed more than soldiers. It needed a savior. The Imperium of man found only ruins. The Xenos had come as they always did, Orc raiders, Eldar corsairs, and things without names that fed on the screams of the innocent. They had come for 30 years, wave after wave, grinding Korova's defenses to dust. The orbital platforms were tombstones now, shattered metal drifting in the planet's gravity well. The cities were charnel houses where the dead outnumbered the living 1,000 to 1. And in the deepest bunker of the last stronghold, surrounded by gene-forging equipment that hummed with fading power, Andros opened his eyes. He was not alone. Father. The word came from a figure in crimson power armor, battle-worn and scored by Xenos weapons. The helmet bore the icon of a star wrapped in protective hands, the Astral Wardens, the 21st Legion of Space Marines, Gene Sons who had searched 3 decades for the father they had never known. We found you at last. Andros's body moved before his mind fully caught up. Decades of muscle memory, of ranger training, of Korovian combat doctrine flooding back. He was on his feet in a heartbeat, scanning the chamber with eyes that saw too much, processed too fast. His body felt wrong, too large, too powerful. The last thing he remembered was the Astro megaship's collision course with Dark Specter's fortress, the final desperate gambit, the blinding light. Where am I? His voice came out deeper than it should, resonating with authority he hadn't earned. What happened to my team? Where's the megaship? The Space Marine removed his helmet, revealing a face that was Andros's own, but harder, older, scarred by years of war. My lord, you speak of things we do not understand. You are Andros, Primarch of the 21st Legion, lost son of the Emperor of mankind. We are your gene sons, born from your genetic template. We have searched the Segmentum Obscurus for 3 decades, while the Imperium waged the Great Crusade across the stars. Korova fell to Xenos raiders 17 years ago. We are all that remains of your people. The words made no sense. Primarch? Emperor? Gene Sons? Andros's mind raced, trying to reconcile impossible information. He looked at his hands, larger than they should be, more powerful, inscribed with scars he didn't recognize. His Korovian physiology had always made him stronger than baseline humans, faster, more resilient. But this was different. This was something that went beyond even Ranger powers. The bunker shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Distant explosions echoed through kilometers of reinforced rockcrete. Orc Warband, the Space Marine said, his voice grim. War Boss Skullbasha has gathered a Wa from 12 systems. They've come to finish what the other Xenos started. We've held them for 6 days, but our ammunition runs low and... How many? Andros cut him off, instinct taking over. Leaders led. Rangers protected. Whatever had happened to him, whatever this place was, people were dying above them, and he'd be damned if he'd let that stand. 43 brothers remain combat effective. We estimate 10,000 orcs in the immediate assault zone. Millions more across the planet. The numbers were insane, suicidal. Andros had led desperate fights before, against Astronoma's forces, against Darkonda, against Dark Specter himself. But this was a different scale entirely. This was industrial warfare, mass slaughter, the kind of conflict where individual lives meant nothing against the grinding arithmetic of attrition. "Show me," Andros said. They ascended through the bunker's levels, each one a testimony to desperate last stands. Crimson-armored space marines manned barricades made from melted orc metal and their own fallen brothers' armor. Automated defense guns fired until they melted, their machine spirits screaming prayers to something called the Omnissiah. The walls were scored by weapons Andros didn't recognize, crude but devastatingly effective implements of Xenos barbarism. The surface was worse. Korova's sky was the color of infected wounds, choked with smoke from burning cities. The orc horde stretched to every horizon, a green tide of muscle, crude armor, and weapons that shouldn't function but did through sheer collective belief. Their war machines belched smoke and obscenities, cobbled together from scrap and madness. And they were laughing as they came, bellowing challenges in a language that was half roar, half mockery. "They got a new boss git," an orc warlord bellowed from atop a mechanical monstrosity. "Come down and get crumped, Red Humie." Andros felt something crystallize inside him. This world was dead. His people were dead. Everything he'd known was gone, replaced by a nightmare galaxy where Xenos literally trampled human worlds beneath their crude boots while laughing about it. He didn't understand what had happened to him, didn't know what a Primarch was supposed to be, didn't recognize the Imperium these space marines served, but he knew how to fight. "All wardens," Andros said, his voice carrying across every Vox channel with an authority that surprised him. "Prepare for full combat engagement. We're taking back my world." The space marine beside him, the one who'd found him, smiled behind his helmet. "It will be an honor to fight beside you, my Primarch. I am Kelvin, first captain of the Astral Wardens. Your legion awaits your command." Andros looked at the orc horde, at the impossible odds, at the space marines who called him father and had searched 30 years to find him. Something in his Korovian blood sang with recognition. These warriors were his in a way that went beyond command structure, beyond loyalty. They were literally born from his genetic code, engineered to be his sons in a galaxy that needed defenders. He'd been a ranger, a protector, a leader who put his team above everything, who'd faced down galactic tyrants and cosmic horrors. This galaxy had taken that from him, twisted him into something larger, more terrible, more powerful. Fine. He'd learn what a Primarch was. He'd master whatever power this transformation had given him, and he'd make every Xenos that touched Korova pay in blood. For Korova, Andros said, for humanity, Astral Wardens, advance. They charged into the green tide, 43 space marines and 1 Primarch against 10,000 orcs. The odds were impossible. The battle was hopeless. The world was already dead. In the grim darkness of the far future, Andros learned his first lesson about the Imperium of man. Hope was not a strategy, but sometimes defiance was enough. The Emperor of Mankind arrived 3 days after the orcs were broken. Andros stood in the ruins of what had been Korova's central spire, surrounded by orc corpses and the exhausted forms of his gene sons. The battle had been brutal beyond anything he'd experienced, not because of the violence which paled compared to his clash with Dark Spectre, but because of the scale. Wave after wave of orcs had thrown themselves at his position, and he'd met them with strength he didn't fully understand. His body moved faster than thought, struck with force that shattered orc war machines, endured wounds that should have killed him. He'd lost 16 space marines in the final push, and each death had felt like losing a piece of himself. The sky tore open with golden light. It wasn't a ship that descended, though massive vessels did appear in orbit. their architecture mixing Gothic grandeur with technological might that put even Korova's lost wonders to shame. It was the light itself that came first, a radiance that drove back the smoke-choked darkness and made every orc corpse seem small and pathetic by comparison. Andros felt something in his chest respond to that light, a genetic imperative coded into his very cells, screaming one word: Father. He rejected it immediately. He'd had a father, or as close as the Korovian Gene Lab scientists could claim, and they died when the Xenos came. He'd had Zordon as a mentor before that entity's sacrifice. He'd built a family with his ranger team, earned their trust through shared battles and mutual sacrifice. This light, this presence, this thing that claimed parenthood through genetic manipulation alone, that required proof. The being that emerged from a golden transport was humanoid, but transcended the category entirely. Clad in armor that seemed woven from light itself, towering even over Andros's enhanced frame, radiating power that made the air taste of ozone and eternity. The Emperor of Mankind was everything the legends whispered, and nothing Andros had prepared for. His face was ageless, neither young nor old, marked by the weight of millennia and the burden of a species' survival. "My son," the Emperor said, his voice simultaneously a whisper in Andros's mind and a thunderclap across the ruined city. "I have searched for you since the dark powers scattered my children across the galaxy. Welcome home." Behind the Emperor came figures in ornate power armor, each radiating authority and power that marked them as more than human, but less than their father. Space Marines, but larger, more magnificent, bearing heraldry that spoke of command over entire Legion forces. These were Primarchs, Andros's brothers in this insane new reality. "Lord Father," one of them said, his armor bearing the Eye of Horus upon his chest, his demeanor that of a perfect warrior diplomat. "Should I secure the perimeter while you speak with our brother?" "That will not be necessary, Horus," the Emperor replied. "Andros is no threat. He is confused, angry, lost. These emotions are understandable. He has awakened to find his world dead, his people scattered, and his purpose stolen by forces beyond his comprehension. We will provide answers." Andros bristled at being analyzed so casually. "You claim to be my father. You claim I'm your son. I don't remember being anyone's science experiment, but Korovian gene forging wasn't exactly natural either." He gestured at the devastation around them. "My world is dead, my people are gone, and you show up 3 days after the fighting's done, when it's convenient, when the hard part's finished. That's not how fathers act. That's how commanders do, arriving after the battle to claim credit." The temperature dropped. Several of the Primarchs stiffened, hands moving toward weapons. The Emperor simply regarded him with eyes that had seen the birth of human civilization. "You speak with the bluntness of one who has known true command," the Emperor said. "Good. The Imperium needs Primarchs who challenge, who question, who refuse blind obedience. Your accusation is noted and accepted. I was not here when Korova fell because I was forging an empire that will ensure no human world suffers as yours did. I did not find you sooner because the Chaos Gods, entities of the warp, the immaterium between stars, scattered my 20 sons across the galaxy at your creation to prevent what we now build." Another Primarch stepped forward, his armor covered in scrollwork and parchment, his manner scholarly despite the bolter mag locked to his thigh. "Brother, I am Robute Gilliman, Primarch of the 13th Legion. I understand your skepticism. Each of us awakened confused, some even hostile. But the Emperor speaks truth. We are his gene-forged sons, created to lead humanity's reconquest of the galaxy. The Great Crusade has reunited 3,000 worlds in 30 years. Your legion, the Astral Wardens, has fought without you for 3 decades, searching while bringing Imperial compliance to dozens of systems. They are exceptional warriors. Imagine what they could accomplish with their Primarch to lead them. Andros looked at First Captain Kelvin, who stood at attention nearby. The Space Marine's expression was unreadable behind his helmet, but Andros could sense the tension. These warriors had bled searching for him. They'd fought for 30 years without the commander their genetics demanded they follow. They'd found him at last, only to watch him question the authority of the being who'd created them all. "How did I get here?" Andros asked, shifting tactics. "Last thing I remember, I was commanding the Astro megaship in my universe. We were fighting Dark Spectre, a cosmic tyrant who'd enslaved entire galaxies. We won. Then, nothing. I wake up here in this body on a Karova that's been dead for years." The Emperor's expression shifted microscopically. "The warp touches all realities. When you fought your Dark Spectre, when energies beyond mortal comprehension clashed, you created a tear in reality itself. The Chaos Gods, always watching for opportunity, seized you and hurled you across dimensions and time, depositing you as an infant on Karova millennia ago. You are not merely transplanted, Andros. You are reborn, remade by my gene craft from the template of who you were into what you are now. A Primarch, a leader of transhuman legions, a sword in humanity's hand." "Chaos Gods," Andros repeated. "You're telling me I was kidnapped by evil gods and turned into a weapon?" A massive Primarch in gray armor, his presence radiating barely contained violence, barked a laugh. "That's one way to put it, brother. I'm Lehman Russ, and my world tried to kill me with wolves and ice for decades. We're all weapons, little brother. Question is whether you'll be a sharp one or a dull one." "The Wolf King lacks subtlety but speaks a truth," another Primarch said, his crimson armor decorated with artistic flourishes that seemed at odds with the weapons he carried. "I am sanguineous. Each of us faced trials on our homeworlds. Each of us rose to lead our people. Each of us now serves a cause greater than any single world, the survival of humanity itself. Your Karova fell because it stood alone. Join us and ensure no human world stands alone again." Andros studied these beings who called themselves his brothers. Horus, the diplomat warrior with eyes that calculated every word. Gilliman, the empire builder who spoke of logistics and strategy. Russ, the savage noble who wore his violence openly. Sanguinius, the angel whose beauty couldn't hide the predator beneath. And the Emperor, whose power dwarfed them all, whose very presence felt like standing in front of a star. They weren't lying. He could sense that much. His Karovian instincts, his ranger experience. Something deeper told him these beings believed what they said. The Emperor had created him, or recreated him, remade him from whatever the morphing grid had made him into something that could lead armies across the stars. The question was whether he wanted what they offered. "My team," Andros said quietly. "The other Rangers." "Where are they?" The Emperor's expression showed something that might have been compassion. "Lost. If they existed in this reality at all, they are beyond our reach. You stand alone, my son, as all Primarchs stand alone in the end." Wrong. The Emperor was wrong. Andros looked at Kelvan, at the Astral Wardens who'd fought beside him, at the Gene Sons who carried his genetic legacy. He wasn't alone. He had a legion. Not the family he'd chosen, but one that had chosen him across 30 years of searching. "If I do this," Andros said, "if I accept being your Primarch, leading this legion, fighting your crusade, I do it my way. My tactics, my command structure, my rules of engagement. I won't become another weapon you point at whatever target needs destroying." The Emperor smiled, and for a moment, Andros saw genuine approval. "That is precisely why I created you. Lead your legion, my son. Show the galaxy what the Red Primarch of Korova can accomplish. Terra awaits. And your brothers are eager to see what their lost sibling will become." Above them, the Imperator Somnium hung in orbit, a vessel that dwarfed continents, armed with weapons that could crack planets. Around it, the fleets of multiple legions assembled, each ship a cathedral of war, carrying thousands of transhuman warriors to humanity's endless wars. Andros had been a ranger, a protector, a leader. Now he was a Primarch, a weapon, a commander of armies. He'd learn what that meant, and maybe, just maybe, he'd find a way to be both. The protector he'd chosen to become, and the weapon they'd made him into. "Take me to Terra," Andros said. "I'll meet your Imperium. Then we'll see if it's worth fighting for." The Astro-Corvan sector burned with the green fury of a war, and Andros learned what it meant to command a legion. 3 months had passed since Terra, 3 months of intensive briefings on Imperial history, Legion organization, void warfare doctrine, and the brutal arithmetic of the Great Crusade. The Administratum had provided casualty estimates for the coming decades, billions of human soldiers dead, millions of space marines lost, entire worlds rendered uninhabitable. The Emperor's vision required oceans of blood to achieve, and the Primarchs were expected to provide it without hesitation. Andros had walked Terra's halls with growing unease. The Imperial Palace was a monument to absolute authority, every corridor designed to remind visitors of humanity's unified might. The Mechanicum factories on Mars churned out weapons with religious fervor, tech priests chanting Binharic prayers over bolter forges that hadn't innovated in centuries. The Imperial Army mustering grounds held billions of soldiers trained to die on command, and through it all, the Emperor's will flowed like an inexorable current, dragging humanity toward a future that demanded total obedience to survive. Guillemon had shown him supply manifests. Horus had explained diplomatic protocols for compliance actions. Russ had taken him drinking and tried to get him to loosen up. Sanguinius had spoken of purpose and duty and the privilege of serving something greater than oneself. None of them had told him it would feel like drowning. Now, aboard the Astral Sovereign, his flagship, a vessel that blended Korovian technology salvaged from his gene labs with Imperial Navy architecture, Andros commanded his first true engagement as a Primarch. The Astral Warden's entire fighting strength, nearly 80,000 Space Marines organized into chapter formations, awaited his orders as an Orc Wog descended on the agri-world of Astro-Corva Prime. "Tactical overview," Andros ordered, his command throne adapted from the megaship's bridge designs. The Mechanicum tech priests had been horrified by his modifications until he demonstrated the superior targeting solutions. Now they called it Inspired Archaeotech and tried not to think about where the designs originated. First, Captain Kelvin activated the hololithic display. The Astro-Corvan system hung in miniature, 5 planets, 2 asteroid belts, and a sun being strangled by orc attack moons that literally propelled themselves through the void on crude rocket engines. Warboss Gritstompa has assembled a WA from 15 conquered systems, estimated 3 million orcs, 500 void-capable vessels, and 12 attack moons. They've already glassed Astro-Corva Secundus. Astro-Corva Prime holds 7 billion human souls and produces food for 3 dozen Imperial worlds. If it falls, entire sectors face famine. Imperial Navy assets? Andros asked, though he already knew the answer from the briefing scrolls. Battlefleet Corva was destroyed holding the system's edge. We're the first reinforcement. Lord Guillemon's 13th Legion is 6 weeks away. By then, the planet will be dead. 7 billion lives. The number was almost incomprehensible. Andros had fought to save cities, to protect the universe, but this was different. This was industrial-scale slaughter, the kind where individual deaths stopped mattering because the numbers grew too large for human comprehension. The Imperium measured casualties in percentages of planetary populations, in acceptable losses, in strategic value versus blood cost. "What's the standard Imperial Navy doctrine for this scenario?" Andros asked. His master of the fleet, a grizzled void captain who'd served the Legion since before Andros was found, answered grimly, "Exterminatus, my lord. Virus bomb the planet, deny the orcs the resources, evacuate essential Imperial personnel, accept 7 billion casualties as regrettable but necessary. Better they die human than become orc food or slaves." Andros felt his jaw tighten. That was the Imperium's answer? Kill billions of innocents to deny the enemy resources. His ranger instincts screamed in protest. You fought to save people, not to become the very thing you fought against. But his Primarch tactical analysis saw the logic. The orcs were superior in numbers, better positioned, and the resources of an agri-world would fuel their wah for years. Billions dead now prevented tens of billions dead later. "No," Andros said, "we're not killing the people we're supposed to protect." "My lord," Kelvan began carefully, "the odds are irrelevant." Andros stood, moving to the hololithic display. His mind worked like it had on the megaship, analyzing positions, calculating vectors, seeing patterns his gene sons couldn't. The Imperials fight like a hammer. Overwhelming force, direct confrontation, acceptable losses. We're not going to fight like that. The Astral Wardens specialize in void warfare and rapid strike operations, so we're going to use what the orcs don't expect. Precision. He manipulated the display, highlighting targets. The orc fleet is concentrated around the attack moons because Grit Stompa rules through intimidation and physical presence. Their void ships are crude but effective because they believe they are, but they're also predictable. Orcs love a good fight, love charging in, love direct confrontation, so we're going to give them one, as bait. His gene sons leaned forward, recognizing the tactical shift. This was closer to how they'd fought for 30 years without him. Hit-and-run raids, supply line disruption, surgical strikes. But now they had their Primarch to coordinate it on a scale they'd never attempted. First through fourth chapters will conduct a frontal assault on the outermost attack moon, Andros continued. Boarding actions, loud and obvious. Make Gristompa think we're trying the standard Imperial tactic of killing the war boss. Meanwhile, 5th through 8th chapters deploy via Thunderhawk to the planet's surface. You'll organize the planetary defense forces, establish kill zones, prepare the cities for siege warfare. "And the rest of the Legion, my lord?" Kelvan asked. Andros smiled, the first genuine smile since arriving in this nightmare galaxy. "We're going hunting. Chapters 9 through 15 will execute simultaneous strikes on the orc supply vessels. No war boss can maintain a wah without loot, ammunition, and fuel. We're going to bleed them in the void while they're distracted by the frontal assault. Death by 1,000 cuts." "The Codex Astartes suggests," began one of his captains. "I haven't read the Codex," Andros interrupted, "and I don't care what it suggests. Guilliman's book is brilliant for standardization, but we're not standardized warriors. We're void specialists. We fight like pirates, like raiders, like rangers." He caught himself on the last word, but none of his gene sons questioned it. The master of the fleet studied the tactical plan, his augmetic eye whirring as it calculated trajectories. "Audacious, my lord. If the orcs break from your predicted behavior patterns, or if Grit Stompa proves more tactically minded than expected, then we adapt," Andros said. "I fought enough tyrants to know they're predictable when you press their egos. Grit Stomper will take the bait because backing down makes him look weak to his boys, and the moment he commits to the frontal assault, he loses the strategic initiative. He turned to face his entire command staff. Space Marine captains gene-forged from his template, Imperial Navy officers, Mechanicum tech priests, and even an astropath whose mind touched the warp to send faster-than-light communications. They were all looking at him with expressions that mixed hope, skepticism, and something close to faith. The Imperium fights wars of attrition because it has the numbers to absorb casualties, Andros said. We don't. The Astral Wardens are under strength compared to other legions. We don't have 100,000 Space Marines to throw at every problem, so we're going to fight smarter, faster, more precisely. We're going to prove that a legion doesn't need to be the biggest to be the most effective. For Kurova, Kelvin said, slamming his fist to his chest in salute. For the Primarch, the entire command deck echoed the salute. For Kurova, for the Primarch. Andros felt that genetic connection again. These warriors literally shared his blood, carried his genetic code, fought with instincts shaped by his own combat patterns. They weren't the Rangers, weren't his chosen family, but they were his sons in a way that transcended normal command structures. All ships, Andros commanded, his voice broadcast across the entire fleet. Prepare for void warfare. We're going to show the Imperium what the 21st Legion can do, and we're going to save every single one of those 7 billion souls. Because that's what the Astral Wardens do. We protect. The Astral Sovereign surged forward, its engines burning with fury that matched its commander's determination. Behind it, the fleet of the Astral Wardens deployed in formations that would have scandalized traditional Imperial Navy doctrine. Too spread out, too vulnerable, too risky. But Andros wasn't fighting an Imperial battle. He was fighting his battle, adapting everything he'd learned as a Ranger to the scale of void warfare, translating tactics meant for a 5-person team into maneuvers for a legion. The Orc, wow, saw them coming and roared its approval. Finally, a proper fight. The Red Humies were coming for a crumpin. Grit Stomper, aboard his flagship Big Adaka, bellowed orders for his boys to prepare for boarding actions. The new Primarch was trying the same tired Imperial tactic. Kill da boss, break da wall. He'd show this red git what happened to Humies who challenged the biggest orc in the sector. The attack moon's defenses activated, crude but devastating weapons that hurled asteroids at relativistic speeds, fired las beams powered by burning orc corpses, launched fighter craft made from scrap and held together by belief. The Astral Warden's first 4 chapters hit the defensive screen like a crimson fist, Thunderhawks deploying Space Marines for boarding actions while the fleet provided covering fire. And while Grit Stomper's attention focused on the frontal assault, Andros led the rest of his legion into the Orc fleet's rear. The supply vessels never saw them coming. One moment the crewed transports were hauling loot and ammunition toward the attack moons. The next, Astral Wardens breached their hulls in coordinated strikes, planting melta charges on critical systems and withdrawing before the Orcs even realized they were under attack. Ship after ship detonated in expanding spheres of plasma, their destruction barely noticed in the larger chaos of the frontal assault. Target the fuel haulers next, Andros commanded from the Astral Sovereign's bridge. No fuel, no mobility, no wah! His gene sons executed with brutal efficiency. The Astral Wardens had spent 30 years fighting as raiders. Now they had a Primarch who understood raiding better than any commander the Imperium had produced. Each strike was surgical, devastating, and gone before the Orcs could respond. By the time Grit Stomper realized he was being outmaneuvered, a quarter of his supply fleet was burning debris. "Boss, the Red Humies are crumping our stuff haulers," one of his lieutenants bellowed. Gritstompa roared in fury, torn between continuing the frontal assault and defending his supplies. The moment of hesitation cost him everything. Andros saw the opening. "All chapters, full assault. Kelvan, take boarding teams directly to Gritstompa's flagship. I'm joining you." "My lord, is that—" "I didn't spend 3 months learning Imperial doctrine to sit on my bridge while my sons fight," Andros said, already moving toward the deployment deck. "Besides, I've been wanting to see what this body can actually do in real combat." He'd killed orcs on Kurova, but that had been survival. This was warfare on a scale that made every previous battle seem small, and as his Thunderhawk screamed toward the Big Adaka, surrounded by hundreds of other assault craft, Andros felt something he hadn't felt since awakening in this nightmare galaxy. Purpose. The Astral Wardens were his now. This legion was his weapon, his responsibility, his family forged in blood and gene craft, and he'd be damned if he let the Imperium's brutal calculus turn them into expendable ammunition. Terra's council chamber held the galaxy's most dangerous beings, and Andros was about to pick a fight with half of them. 6 weeks had passed since Astro Corva. The Astral Wardens had shattered Gritstompa's saved 7 billion lives with only 1,400 Space Marine casualties, and proven that unconventional tactics could achieve what Imperial orthodoxy insisted was impossible. Fleet Command had been impressed, the Mechanicum had been intrigued, the other legions had been complicated. Now Andros stood in a chamber designed to dwarf visitors, surrounded by his gene-forged brothers as the Emperor's War Council debated the future of the Great Crusade. 18 Primarchs attended. The 19th, Alfarius, was characteristically absent on classified operations, and the 20th Legion's Primarch remained undiscovered. Each was a legend, a conqueror of worlds, a being who'd reshaped entire star systems according to their father's vision. Horus Lupercal, the War Master, recently elevated to command the entire Great Crusade, stood at the Emperor's right hand. His charisma filled the room like a physical presence, making even the disagreements feel like friendly debates among brothers. He'd welcomed Andros warmly after Astra Corva, praising his unorthodox tactics while gently suggesting ways to make them more compatible with broader Imperial strategy. Robute Gilliman stood near detailed hololithic displays showing supply lines across a dozen sectors. The Lord of Ultramar was brilliant, no one disputed that, but his insistence on codifying everything, on creating standardized responses for infinite variables, made Andros's teeth itch. The Codex Astartes Gilliman was drafting would revolutionize the legions, but it would also chain them to doctrine that stifled adaptation. Leman Russ lounged in a seat far too small for his massive frame, flanked by Wolfguard who looked more like barbarian kings than space marines. The Wolf King had personally congratulated Andros after Astro Corva, declaring him a proper fighter and insisting they share drinks. Andros had learned that Russ's savage exterior hid a tactical mind that could rival Gilliman's. The difference was Russ trusted instinct, where Gilliman trusted calculation. Sanguinius stood with perfect posture, his wings, actual wings, products of mutation that the Emperor had allowed due to their utility, folded behind him. The Angel of Baal was everything heroic propaganda claimed, noble, compassionate, deadly. He'd spoken with Andros about the burden of command, about making impossible choices with grace. Andros respected him but couldn't shake the feeling that Sanguinius had convinced himself being a weapon was noble rather than admitting what they all truly were. Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, stood like a fortress given human form. His legion specialized in siege warfare and defensive positions, the opposite of Andros's hit-and-run tactics. They'd barely spoken, but Dorn's evaluating gaze suggested he was cataloging Andros's methods for future reference. Ferrus Manus, master of the Iron Hands, had cybernetic arms that could crush ceramite. His obsession with replacing flesh with machine disturbed Andros on levels he couldn't articulate. Weakness wasn't something to eliminate. It was something to acknowledge and work around. Jagatai Khan, the Warhawk, led the White Scars in lightning assaults that made even Andros's tactics look conservative. They'd found common ground discussing mobility warfare, though Khan's approach relied on raw speed while Andros preferred coordinated precision. Magnus the Red towered over his brothers, his single eye glowing with psychic power. The Crimson King commanded sorceries that terrified even other Primarchs, and his Thousand Sons Legion pushed the boundaries of the Emperor's restrictions on psyker use. Magnus had tried to discuss the nature of the warp with Andros, probing for understanding of how dimensional travel worked. Andros had deflected. Something about Magnus felt wrong, like standing too close to a reactor about to breach containment. The others, Vulcan, Corvus Corax, Conrad Kurze, Angron, Mortarion, Lorgar, Fulgrim, Perturabo. Each commanded legions and carried their own legends. Each had their own methods, philosophies, and secrets. The question before us, Horus said, his voice cutting through side conversations, is whether the Astro Corva campaign represents a replicable model or an exceptional circumstance requiring exceptional methods. Gilliman stepped forward, activating detailed battle analyses. Lord Andros's tactics achieved remarkable success with minimal casualties. His after-action reports demonstrate tactical innovation worthy of study. However, the Codex Astartes I'm developing requires consistency across legions. If every Primarch employs radically different methods, joint operations become impossible to coordinate. Joint operations work when commanders talk to each other, Andros interjected. I've read your Codex drafts, Gilliman. They're brilliant for creating baseline competency, but baseline competency doesn't win impossible battles. Adaptation does. Spoken like a commander who's fought one major campaign, Perturabo said, his voice bitter. The Lord of Iron had spent decades grinding through siege after siege, losing sons to wars of attrition that never earned him glory. Your void raids work against orcs. Try them against Eldar who predict your movements, or chaos cults that corrupt your warriors from within. I fought cosmic tyrants in my previous life, Andros replied evenly. Enemies who conquered galaxies, who saw across dimensions, who made your Eldar look primitive. I learned that rigid doctrine gets people killed. You adapt or you die. Previous life? Magnus leaned forward, his eye glowing brighter. Brother, you speak as if you remember something before I was found, Andros said quickly, catching himself. The Emperor had warned him never to speak openly about his dimensional origin. The Imperium wouldn't understand, and the Mechanicum would declare him tech heresy made flesh. Kurova's gene forges left impressions, dreams maybe. Magnus didn't look convinced, but Horus smoothly redirected. What matters is Lord Andros brings fresh perspective. The Great Crusade has standardized many approaches, but we must be careful not to eliminate the very innovation that makes us effective. Innovation has limits, Mortarion interjected, his voice raspy from poison-damaged lungs. The Death Lord commanded the Death Guard with grim determination, never asking his sons to endure what he wouldn't. I've seen Xenos technology that seemed innovative until it corrupted those who wielded it. The Mechanicum's restrictions exist for reasons, Andros. Your astral sovereign's modified bridge protocols disturb them. They whisper that your technology doesn't match known human STC patterns. Because it doesn't, Andros admitted. Kurova developed independently during Old Night. My gene sire saved designs before the world fell. The Mechanicum can dissect them after I'm done using them to save Imperial lives. See? Perturabo gestured aggressively. He admits Hirtech origins. The Omnissiah's doctrine saved 0 lives at Astrocorva, Andros finished, while my Hirtech origins saved 7 billion. If the Mechanicum wants to debate theology, they can do it after we've won the crusade. Lehman Russ barked a laugh. I like this pup. Says what he thinks, doesn't dress it up in pretty words. The Wolf King approves. The issue, Rogel Dorn said, his voice flat and factual, is integration. Lord Andros operates outside standard command structures. This creates supply chain complications, coordination delays, and potential conflicts with unified strategic planning. Then don't integrate me into your standard structures, Andros said. Give the Astral Wardens missions suited to our capabilities. Void warfare, rapid response, surgical strikes against targets. Conventional legions can't efficiently engage. You don't use a scalpel like a hammer, and you don't use a hammer like a scalpel. Sanguinius nodded thoughtfully. There is wisdom in that. The Emperor created us to be different precisely because the galaxy requires different approaches. Lord Andros's methods complement rather than contradict existing doctrine. They also risk, Fulgrim added, his voice cultured and precise, encouraging other legions to abandon proven methods in pursuit of innovation for innovation's sake. The Emperor's children, perfect techniques through discipline and practice. Your approach suggests that experience can be replaced by inspiration. No, Andros said. My approach suggests that experience without adaptation breeds stagnation. Ask Perturabo how many times following doctrine perfectly still got his legion mauled in siege warfare that should have been bypassed entirely. The temperature in the chamber dropped. Perturabo's hands clenched into fists, his augmetic eye glowing with rage. You dare! Brothers! Horus interjected, his War Master's authority filling the space. This debate, while passionate, misses the point. Lord Andros has proven his methods work. Whether they're replicable elsewhere is secondary to whether they're acceptable in his Legion's operations. Unless someone here believes the Astral Wardens should be disbanded or forcibly restructured. Silence. Even Perturabo, for all his bitterness, wouldn't suggest destroying a functional legion. Then it's settled, Horus continued. Lord Andros will continue commanding the Astral Wardens according to his best judgment, with appropriate oversight from this council. His methods will be documented for potential adaptation by other legions, but not mandated. Does that satisfy everyone? It satisfied no one, which Andros was learning meant it was probably a good compromise. Guilliman looked like he wanted to argue further, but recognized political reality. Perturabo seethed but had no grounds to object. Magnus watched Andros with unsettling intensity, clearly suspicious about the dream's explanation. One more thing, Lorgar spoke for the first time, the word-bearer's voice carrying religious fervor that made Andros's skin crawl. Lord Andros, do you accept the Emperor as divine, as the avatar of humanity's manifest destiny? The chamber went silent. This wasn't just a theological question. It was a test. The imperial truth officially denied the Emperor's divinity, declared him simply the pinnacle of human evolution. But Lorgar's word-bearers worshipped him as a god, and rumor suggested the Emperor had recently rebuked Lorgar for this belief, humiliating him publicly by destroying an entire world the word-bearers had converted to imperial worship. Andros met his father's eyes across the chamber. The Emperor's expression revealed nothing, but Andros sensed this answer mattered more than any tactical debate. I accept the Emperor as my creator, Andros said carefully, as a being of immense power who's guiding humanity towards survival in a galaxy that wants us extinct. Whether that makes him divine is semantics. What matters is whether I'll follow his vision. And the answer is yes. as long as that vision includes protecting the people we're supposed to be saving. Conditional loyalty, Conrad Kurz said from the shadows, his voice carrying madness barely restrained. The Night Haunter's methods were brutal even by Imperial standards, entire populations flayed alive as examples. How noble, how naive. This galaxy breaks such nobility eventually. Then I guess we'll see if I break, Andros replied. The Emperor stood and every Primarch immediately fell silent. My sons debate philosophy while the galaxy burns. Lord Andros will lead the Astral Wardens according to his judgment. Those who object may challenge his methods by achieving superior results. This council is dismissed. As the Primarchs filed out, Horus approached Andros with a warm smile. Don't take Perturabo's hostility personally. He's bitter from decades of thankless sieges. Your success highlights his difficulties. I noticed, Andros said, but I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to lead my legion and keep as many people alive as possible. A noble goal, Horus said. Perhaps too noble for this galaxy, but I admire your conviction. If you ever need counsel or support, know that I consider you a true brother. The War Master's favor can open many doors. Something in Horus's tone made Andros's instincts flare. The same warning that had saved him from Darkonda's manipulations, from Dark Specter's corrupted offers of power. Horus was being genuine, but there was something beneath the warmth, something that calculated and measured and prepared for future use. I appreciate that, Andros said non-committally. As Horus departed, Magnus lingered. Your dreams, brother. The impressions from Kerova's gene forges. I could help you understand them, explore their origins through psychic means. That won't be necessary, Andros said. I'm managing fine. Are you? Magnus's eyes seemed to pierce through him. You carry knowledge that doesn't fit this galaxy. Power that predates your creation, secrets that are mine, Andros finished. Thank you for the offer, Magnus. But some mysteries are better left unexplored. The Crimson King studied him a moment longer, then nodded slowly. As you wish, but know that forbidden knowledge can save as well as corrupt. When you're ready to discuss what you truly are, find me. Alone in the council chamber, Andros looked out at Holy Terra, the birthplace of humanity, now an ecumenopolis where trillions lived in hive city squalor, while the elite ruled from palace fortresses. This was the Imperium he'd sworn to serve, magnificent and terrible, brutal and necessary, saving humanity by destroying what made it human. His brothers were weapons wrapped in nobility. The Emperor was a tyrant who might be humanity's only hope. And Andros was caught between what he'd been, a ranger who chose to protect, and what he'd become, a Primarch engineered to conquer. The Astral Wardens awaited his return to the fleet, 80,000 Gene Sons who trusted him to lead them well, to use their lives for purposes worth dying for. He wouldn't waste them on the Imperium's brutal calculus of acceptable losses, but he was learning that in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, acceptable was a sliding scale, and sometimes the choice wasn't between right and wrong, it was between terrible and worse. Andros left the council chamber, his enhanced hearing catching whispered conversations between Primarchs discussing the newest brother. Some praised his innovation, others questioned his loyalty. A few suggested he needed to be broken of his independence before it infected other legions. Let them talk. He had a legion to lead and a galaxy to figure out. The Great Crusade continued, and the Red Primarch of Kerova would find his place in it, whether the Imperium liked his methods or not. The world of Kalith Prime gleamed like a jewel in the void, and Andros was being ordered to shatter it. 4 months after the Terra War Council, the Astral Wardens had fought in a dozen campaigns, crushing Orc enclaves, disrupting Eldar raids, bringing Imperial compliance to human worlds that had survived Old Night in isolation. Each compliance had been different. Some worlds welcomed the Imperium with relief, eager for protection and trade. Others resisted, clinging to independence that had sustained them through millennia of darkness. Calith Prime was different. The planet's cities sparkled with technology that rivaled anything Korova had achieved, spire towers that harvested stellar energy, medical facilities that extended human lifespans to 2 centuries, education networks that guaranteed literacy and technical training for every citizen. 5 billion people lived in a society that valued art, science, and philosophy. They'd survived Old Night not through regression, but through careful preservation of human achievement. And they rejected the Imperial truth, absolutely. Lord Primarch, First Captain Kelvin reported from the Astral Sovereign's Bridge. The Calithian Council has transmitted their final response. They acknowledge humanity's shared origin, but refuse to abandon their democratic governance or religious freedoms. They consider the Imperial Truth's atheism and the Emperor's authority to be incompatible with human dignity. Andros studied the hololithic display showing Calith Prime's defenses. The planet wasn't helpless. Orbital platforms mounted weapons that could threaten even Legion vessels, and their ground forces were well-trained and equipped. Not enough to defeat the Astral Wardens, but enough to make compliance costly. Millions would die on both sides if this turned to warfare. "What are our orders?" Andros asked, though he already knew. Kelvin hesitated. Lord Gilliman transmitted compliance protocols directly. Standard ultimatum: submit to Imperial authority within 72 hours or face military action. All resistance is to be crushed. The population is to be re-educated in the Imperial truth. Religious leaders are to be executed as examples. Democratic institutions are to be dismantled and replaced with Imperial governance. Execute religious leaders, Andros repeated flatly, for the crime of believing in something other than the Emperor. "The Imperial truth is absolute, my lord," Kelvin said, but his voice carried uncertainty. "The Emperor forbids religious worship because it empowers the Chaos Gods in the warp. Faith feeds them, makes them stronger. To allow religion is to arm humanity's enemies." Andros had learned about chaos over the past months, the 4 ruinous powers that lived in the Imperium, feeding on human emotion and corrupting anyone who touched the warp. Khorne grew strong on violence, Tsiench on ambition, Nurgle on despair, Slaanesh on excess. The Emperor's Imperial truth supposedly starved them by denying their existence, by replacing faith with reason. But Andros had seen faith in action. He'd watched the morphing grid respond to belief, seen Zordon's sacrifice powered by conviction, felt the strength that came from believing in something larger than oneself. Not all faith corrupted, not all belief fed monsters. "How long until Gilliman's fleet arrives to oversee compliance?" Andros asked. 6 days, my lord. He expects initial resistance to be broken by then, with re-education camps established for the population. 6 days. Andros had 6 days to decide whether he'd become the very thing he'd fought against, a tyrant who destroyed freedom in the name of protecting it. "Open a channel to Calith Prime," Andros ordered. "Direct to their council. No Imperial intermediaries." The hololithic display shifted, showing 7 human figures, the Calithian Council of Elders, elected representatives of their world's population. They wore simple robes rather than the elaborate regalia Imperial governors favored, and their faces showed more determination than fear. Primarch Andros, the eldest counselor, said, a woman whose enhanced longevity showed in silver hair, but youthful eyes. We've studied your campaigns. You saved Astro Corva when Imperial doctrine demanded its sacrifice. You've shown restraint where other legions showed brutality. We hope to appeal to that restraint now. The Emperor's orders are clear, Andros said. You will submit to Imperial compliance or face military action. Those are your options. Then we choose neither, she replied. We choose to remain free, to govern ourselves, to believe what we wish. We'll die before we surrender those rights. You'll have to kill every one of us, Primarch. 5 billion souls on your conscience. Can you carry that weight? Andros felt his gene sons watching him, waiting to see what their Primarch would choose. The Imperium's calculus was simple. 5 billion dead now prevented billions more from following their example, from believing worlds could reject Imperial authority. Compliance was absolute or meaningless. But Andros remembered being a ranger, remembered making impossible choices, remembered the difference between protecting people and destroying what made them worth protecting. Give me 72 hours, Andros said. Don't fire on my ships. Don't mobilize your forces. Just wait. Can you do that? The council exchanged glances. What are you planning? I don't know yet, Andros admitted. But I'm going to find an option that doesn't end with 5 billion corpses or forced re-education camps. That's the best I can promise. The transmission ended. Kelvin approached carefully. My lord, Lord Guilliman's orders are to achieve compliance, Andros finished. He didn't specify how. I'm going to achieve it my way. For 72 hours, Andros worked. He transmitted intelligence reports to the Calithian Council, showing what happened to worlds the Orcs conquered, to civilizations the Eldar raided for sport, to populations the Tyranids consumed. He showed them the galaxy's brutal reality. Humanity was surrounded by Xenos that wanted them extinct, and only the Imperium had the strength to resist. He negotiated. Calith Prime could maintain local governance if they accepted an imperial governor with veto authority over military and foreign policy. They could practice their religions privately if they acknowledged the Emperor's secular authority publicly. They could keep their technology if Mechanicum tech priests verified it was human origin and blessed by the Omnissiah. It was compromise. It was half measures. It violated the spirit of the imperial truth while technically achieving compliance. And the Calithian Council accepted. When Guilliman arrived 6 days later, he found Calith Prime flying imperial banners, paying tithes to the Administratum, and training regiments for the Imperial Army. The planet's technology was being catalogued by the Mechanicum. The population had sworn oaths of loyalty to the Emperor. Guilliman's expression as he reviewed Andros's after-action report was unreadable. You allowed them to maintain democratic structures, Guilliman said. You permitted religious practice to continue. You compromised on core Imperial doctrine. I achieved compliance without firing a shot, Andros replied. 5 billion humans now serve the Imperium. Their technology benefits the Mechanicum. Their food production feeds 3 other worlds, and no one had to die. You set a precedent, Guilliman countered. Every world that resists will now expect negotiation. Every population will demand your compassionate compliance instead of accepting imperial truth. You've made future compliance actions more difficult for every other legion. Or I've shown that compliance doesn't have to mean annihilation, Andros said. That the Imperium can be something other than a boot stamping on humanity's face forever. Guilliman was silent for a long moment. Finally, the Emperor created you to innovate, to challenge conventional thinking. But innovation without discipline creates chaos. What happens when Lorgar hears of your religious compromise? When Mortarion uses your precedent to ignore orders he disagrees with? when every Primarch decides their judgment supersedes Imperial doctrine? Then we'll have Primarchs who think for themselves instead of blindly following orders, Andros said. Isn't that why the Emperor made us individuals instead of identical copies? He made you weapons, Guilliman said quietly. Brilliant, powerful, essential weapons. But weapons nonetheless, and weapons that choose their own targets eventually turn on their wielders. He transmitted updated orders. You will remain on Calith Prime for 6 months, ensuring compliance remains stable. Any deviation from their oaths, any sign of sedition, and you will personally execute their counsel as you should have done initially. Consider this your lesson in the consequences of mercy. You're now responsible for ensuring it wasn't misplaced. Guilliman's fleet departed, leaving Andros with a planet he'd saved, but now had to watch for betrayal. Kelvan found him on the observation deck, staring at Calith Prime's surface. Did we do the right thing, my lord? I don't know, Andros admitted. I saved 5 billion lives, but Guilliman's right. I set a precedent that might get billions more killed when other worlds expect the same mercy and other Primarchs don't provide it. There's no clean answer here. The Emperor protects, Kelvan offered. Does he, Andros asked, or does he just demand we protect his Imperium, regardless of the cost? 6 months. Andros had 6 months to prove that compassion and compliance could coexist, that the Imperium could be something other than endless brutality, or 6 months to watch everything he'd tried to preserve collapse into the very rebellion he'd hoped to prevent. In the grim darkness of the far future, even victory tasted like defeat. The message arrived via astropathic transmission, its urgency burning through the warp like a scream made manifest. Eist von Thrur, Horus has turned traitor. Loyalists being purged, Imperium at war with itself. Andros stood on the Astral Sovereign's bridge, the words repeating in his mind as the galaxy he'd been struggling to understand shattered completely. Horus, the War Master, the Emperor's chosen, the brother who'd welcomed him warmly and offered friendship, had betrayed everything. Confirm the transmission, Andros ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos screaming through his thoughts. The astropath, a withered figure whose eyes had been burned out by psychic power, trembled as she channeled more messages. Multiple sources confirm, Lord Primarch. The Lunar Wolves, now calling themselves the Sons of Horus, have virus-bombed their own legions on Istvan III. World Eaters, Emperor's Children, and Death Guard participated. Loyalist elements within all 4 legions were on the surface when the Life Eater weapons struck. Billions dead in minutes. Captain Garo of the Death Guard escaped to warn Terra. Lord Dawn is fortifying the Imperial Palace. The Emperor walks among us again, my lord. He's reclaimed command of the Imperium's defense. Which legions remain loyal? Kelvin demanded. The astropath's voice cracked. Ultramarines, Imperial Fists, Blood Angels, White Scars, Space Wolves, Salamanders, Raven Guard, Iron Hands, confirmed loyal. Dark Angels returning from the edge of the galaxy, the Night Lords, Iron Warriors, Word Bearers, Alpha Legion. Reports are conflicting. My lord, some say traitor, some say uncertain. And the Astral Wardens, Andros asked. Has anyone questioned our loyalty? Silence. Then, no specific orders, my lord. Your legion is too small to tip the strategic balance immediately. Both sides may be evaluating your position. Andros felt ice in his veins. Both sides. The Imperium had split down the middle, and apparently his loyalty was uncertain enough that neither faction assumed his allegiance. Was it because he'd questioned Imperial doctrine? Because he'd compromised on Calith Prime? Because he was the newest Primarch, the one who'd fought only months instead of decades, the outsider who'd never quite fit Imperial orthodoxy. "What are our current orders?" Andros asked. "None," Kelvin reported. "We're assigned to Kaleth Prime garrison duty. No reassignment has arrived," which meant Andros had to choose, not based on orders, not based on doctrine, but based on what he believed was right in a conflict where both sides would commit atrocities. "All senior officers to the war room," Andros commanded. "We need to discuss this as a legion." An hour later, Andros faced his command staff, captains who'd led campaigns across the Crusade, officers who'd spent 30 years bleeding for the Imperium before their Primarch was even found. They deserved honesty. "Horus has betrayed the Emperor," Andros began. "Half the legions may follow him into rebellion. The Imperium is tearing itself apart, and we need to decide where the Astral Wardens stand." "With the Emperor," Kelvin said immediately. "My lord, this isn't a debate. Horus is a traitor." "We serve. Who do we serve?" Andros interrupted. "I've spent 6 months watching the Imperium burn worlds, execute innocents, crush anything that doesn't fit its doctrine. I saved Kaleth Prime and got censured for it. Horus welcomed me when other brothers saw me as an outsider. The War Master showed me more respect than the Emperor's fanatics ever did." The room went silent. Several officers reached for weapons. "I'm not saying I support Horus," Andros continued. "I'm saying this isn't simple. Horus rebelled for reasons. Maybe he saw what I've seen, that the Imperium is becoming the very tyranny it claims to fight. Maybe he thinks he can do better. Or maybe he's been corrupted by something worse than Imperial brutality. We need to know which before we commit 80,000 lives to one side or the other." "The Emperor created us," another captain said. "That alone demands loyalty." "Dark Spectre created weapons too," Andros replied. "That didn't make his cause just. Creation doesn't equal righteousness. We need to think this through." "What did Dark Spectre offer you?" a voice asked from the chamber's entrance. Andros turned to see a figure in Mark IV power armor, but not Astral Warden's crimson. This was the deep purple of the Emperor's children, edged with gold and bearing perfection in every detail. The legionary removed his helmet, revealing a face of unsettling beauty. "I am Captain Lucius," the warrior said, "sent by Lord Fulgrim with a message for Lord Andros. The War Master Horus extends his regards and wishes to speak with you directly. He believes you, of all the Primarchs, might understand why this war was necessary." Kelvin drew his bolt pistol. "Traitor, you dare board our flagship?" "Stand down," Andros ordered. "Let's hear what Horus has to say." The message Crystal Lucius provided projected Horus's image, the War Master looking not like a traitor but like a leader bearing terrible burdens. "Brother Andros, by now you've heard I've betrayed the Emperor. The word betrayal assumes I've broken faith with something worthy of faith. I haven't. I've broken chains. The Emperor lied to us, brother. He told us the imperial truth, denied gods because reason was stronger than faith. The truth? He denied gods because he is a god, and he wants no rivals. The beings in the warp, the chaos gods as they're called, they're real, they're powerful, and the Emperor has been using them, bargaining with them, stealing their power to create us. We're not triumphs of science, Andros. We're products of dark sorcery and stolen divinity. Magnus discovered this. The Emperor punished him for it, sent the Wolf King to destroy Prospero, to burn the Thousand Suns libraries because they contained truths the Emperor wanted hidden. Lorgar worshipped the Emperor as divine, and the Emperor destroyed one of his worlds as punishment, not because worship was wrong, but because the Emperor wanted to be worshipped on his terms alone. I rebelled because the Imperium is a lie, because the Emperor uses us as weapons and discards us when convenient, Because I saw the future he's building. 10,000 years of stagnation, of humanity trapped in darkness, of the Emperor sitting on a throne of bones while we fight his endless wars. The powers I've embraced offer liberation, power without chains, freedom to forge our own destiny rather than serve his vision. Join me, brother. The Astral Wardens don't fit Imperial doctrine anyway. You've seen how they censure innovation, punish mercy, demand blind obedience. You're a protector, Andros. The Emperor made you a weapon. Which will you choose to be? The message ended. Andros stood silent, processing everything he'd heard. Horus's words resonated. The Emperor had lied about creation. The Imperium was brutal and stagnant. Andros had been censured for showing mercy. But he'd also fought Dark Spectre. He'd seen what happened when cosmic powers offered freedom without consequences, when liberation meant becoming the very monsters you fought. My lord, Kelvin's voice was tight. What are your orders? Andros looked at Lucius. Tell Horus I appreciate his message. Tell him I understand his grievances. Tell him the Emperor's Imperium is deeply flawed. Lucius smiled. Then you'll join. Tell him I remember what happened to my last universe, when tyrants fought for control, Andros continued. Tell him I've seen what liberation from cosmic powers really costs, and tell him that if he's embraced the things in the warp, the chaos gods he says are real, then he's already lost whatever nobility drove his rebellion. The smile vanished. You're making a mistake, Lord Andros. Probably, Andros admitted, but it's my mistake to make. The Astral Wardens stand with the Emperor. Not because he's righteous, he's not. Not because the Imperium is just. It isn't. But because whatever Horus has become, whatever powers he's bargaining with, they're worse. I've fought cosmic corruption before. I recognize it when I see it. Lucius's hand moved toward his weapon. 20 bolters tracked him instantly. Leave, Andros said. Tell Horus the Astral Wardens will see him on the battlefield. We'll settle this like warriors, not conspirators. After Lucius departed, Kelvan approached cautiously. You considered it. Joining Horus. For about 5 seconds, Andros admitted. Long enough to realize that every tyrant thinks they're freeing people from worse tyrants. Dark Spectre promised liberation too. So did Astronema before she broke free. So did every villain I fought who convinced themselves their evil was justified. Horus is doing the same thing, convincing himself that bargaining with chaos is somehow better than serving the Emperor. Both choices are terrible, Kelvan observed. Yeah, Andros agreed. Welcome to the grim darkness of the far future. All choices are terrible. You just pick which terrible you can live with. A new astropathic message arrived, this time from Rogel Dorn, transmitted to all loyal legions. 7 legends confirmed traitor. Horus leading rebellion toward Terra. All loyal forces regroup. Emperor demands absolute loyalty, no compromise, death to traitors. Andros read the message and felt the galaxy narrow to a single terrible truth. There would be no more moral debates, no more questions about Imperial doctrine, no more room for compromise like Kalith Prime. The heresy had begun, and it would burn away everything except loyalty or death. Prepare the Legion, Andros ordered. We're going to war against our brothers. And may the Emperor protect us all, because I don't think anyone else will. The Astral Sovereign shuddered as warp spawn clawed at its Gellar field, and Andros learned that some of his gene sons had been praying to the wrong gods. 3 weeks after declaring for the Emperor, the Astral Wardens had been redeploying toward Terra when the betrayal struck. Not from outside, from within. Captain Theron of the 9th chapter had stood in the Strategium, his crimson armor suddenly crawling with runes that hurt to see, and declared his allegiance to new masters who promised power the Emperor had denied. Lord Primarch, Theron had said, his voice layered with harmonics that suggested multiple beings speaking through one throat. The Changer of Ways has shown me the truth. Your loyalty to the Emperor dooms us. But Tzeentch offers evolution, transformation, power to protect rather than just obey. Join us, Father. Become what you were meant to be. Free. Now, 6 hours into a mutiny that had split the Legion, Andros fought through his own flagship's corridors against gene suns corrupted by chaos. The 9th chapter had turned entirely. 3,000 space marines whose armor now bore marks of Tzeentch, whose bodies twisted with mutations, whose eyes blazed with warp fire. Worse, elements of the 6th and 12th chapters had joined them, seduced by promises of power or driven by desperation born from watching the Imperium's brutality. Nearly 8,000 traitors within the Legion. 10% of his sons turned against him. Andros's power sword, a master-crafted blade he'd named Spiral Edge after the saber he'd lost between dimensions, carved through corrupted ceramite as a former captain charged him. The warrior's face was his own, but wrong. Stretched into proportions that suggested too many dimensions occupying one space. "Father," the traitor screamed, "Tzeentch showed me your origin. You were never meant to serve the Emperor. You're from another dimension, another reality. You don't belong to his plan. Join us and reclaim." Andros's blade took his head. No time for speeches, no room for doubt. These were his sons, and he was killing them because they'd chosen corruption over loyalty to a tyrant. He wasn't sure deserved that loyalty. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Bridge secured," Kelvin reported over Vox. "But they've corrupted 3 entire decks. Demons are manifesting, my lord. The Geller field is holding, but..." The ship lurched. Somewhere in its depths, reality tore as something from the warp pushed through weakened barriers. Andros felt it like ice in his spine, the same sensation he'd experienced when Dark Spectre's forces had corrupted dimensional barriers, when reality itself became negotiable. "All loyal chapters, converge on engineering," Andros commanded, sprinting through corridors he'd walked as commander, but now fought through as executioner. "They're trying to sabotage the Geller field. If it falls, demons will flood the entire ship." He burst into engineering to find a nightmare. Tech priests lay dead, their augmetics torn away and used to construct a ritual circle that pulsed with warp energy. At its center stood Theron, his armor now fully transformed. Ceramite had become something that shifted between states, colors that didn't exist in real space, symbols that burned retinas to perceive. And behind him, pressing through the weakened veil of reality, something vast and terrible took interest in the proceedings. "A Primarch fighting his own sons," the demon said, its voice honey and poison. "Such delicious irony. The protector become destroyer, the father become executioner. Tzeentch savors your despair, Andros of Kerova. Every son you kill feeds the Changer. Every moment of doubt strengthens us." Andros had fought demons before, minor manifestations when the Geller field flickered, warp predators that attacked ships in transit. But this was different. This was a greater demon, a lord of change, one of Tzeentch's favored servants. Its presence warped reality, made geometry impossible, turned certainty into confusion. "You don't have to do this," Theron said, his voice still human beneath the corruption. "Father, please. I've seen what the Imperium becomes, 10,000 years of darkness. The Emperor entombed in a slowly failing throne. Humanity worshipping him as a god despite his hatred of worship. Everything he built turning to ash. I turned to save you from that fate. By damning yourself," Andros moved forward, each step fighting against reality that didn't want him approaching. "By selling your soul to things that eat civilizations?" By accepting power to protect, Theron gestured, and warp fire erupted. You taught us that, Father. You said we fight to protect, not just to obey. Well, Tzeentch offers protection the Emperor never could. Evolution, transformation, power to change fate instead of serving it blindly. The demon laughed. He speaks truth, Primarch. Your Emperor made you weapons. We offer to make you gods. Your Korovian heritage, your dimensional origin, it makes you perfect for our gifts. Tzeentch saw you arrive in this galaxy. He's been waiting for this moment. Join us, and you'll have power to truly protect. Refuse, and watch your legion tear itself apart. Andros felt the temptation, not because the demon's words were convincing, but because they were partially right. The Emperor had made him a weapon. The Imperium was brutal and corrupt, and Andros's every instinct screamed to find a way to protect people without serving tyrants. But he'd learned something since arriving in this nightmare galaxy. Sometimes there were no good choices. Sometimes you picked the lesser evil and lived with the consequences. Theron, Andros said quietly, do you remember the oath of moment you swore when I took command? To protect humanity, to serve the Legion, to honor the fallen. Which part of that oath includes bargaining with entities that want to eat human souls? The Emperor bargained with them to create us, Theron screamed. Why is it heresy when we do what he did? Because he's strong enough to lie to gods, Andros replied. And you're not. None of us are. The moment you accepted Tzeentch's gifts, you stopped being my son and became his puppet. He charged. The demon moved to intercept, but Andros had fought cosmic entities before. He'd learned that overwhelming power could be defeated by precise action, that gods were vulnerable when they manifested physically. Spiral Edge, master-crafted by the finest artificers on Terra and blessed with his own will, carved through warp flesh. The demon shrieked, not in pain but in surprise that a Primarch could harm it without psychic powers. Impossible! You have no psychic gift, no warp touch. How can you— I don't need warp powers, Andros said, driving his blade deeper. I have 30 years of fighting things like you. You're just another cosmic tyrant wearing a different face. Behind him, loyal astral wardens breached engineering. Bolter fire filled the chamber as they engaged the corrupted ninth chapter. Brother fought brother in corridors designed for maintenance, not warfare. The ship's own systems became weapons, vented plasma, explosive decompression, bulkheads that crushed friend and foe alike. Theron raised his hands and reality bent. Space Marines on both sides froze mid-combat as time itself became negotiable. Father, last chance. Join us or die with your false loyalty. Andros looked at his corrupted son, at the mutations crawling beneath his armor, at the madness burning in eyes that had once looked at him with reverence. I love you, Theron. You're my son, my gene legacy, my responsibility, which is why I can't let you damn yourself further. He moved faster than time manipulation could track, Primarch speed that made even Astartes look slow. Spiral Edge took Theron through the chest, the master-crafted blade piercing both hearts. Father, Theron whispered, his form beginning to collapse. I just wanted to protect. I know, Andros said softly, but protection through corruption isn't protection. It's just becoming the monster to fight monsters. Theron died. The ritual circle collapsed. The greater demon, its anchor severed, shrieked curses as reality expelled it back into the warp. And throughout the ship, the remaining traitors found themselves suddenly alone, their patron's power withdrawn, facing loyalists who'd watched their brothers die to corruption. The purge lasted 4 more hours. By the end, 8,000 astral wardens were dead. Some traitors, some loyalists caught in the crossfire, all of them Andros's sons. He stood in the astral sovereign's main hangar, surrounded by the bodies of gene-sons he'd led, taught, fought beside. Kelvan approached, his armor scored by bolter fire and warp flame. "The Legion is secure, my lord," Kelvan reported. 72,000 battle-ready, all confirmed loyal, all swear renewed oaths to you and the Emperor. 72,000, Andros repeated. From 80, 10% casualties, not to enemy action, not to Xenos, to our own corruption, to choices I maybe could have prevented if I'd seen the signs. You couldn't have known, my lord? I should have, Andros said. I'm their Primarch. I should have seen that questioning Imperial doctrine would make some of them vulnerable to promises of power. I should have realized that my own doubts would echo in theirs. Theron turned because I taught him to question, to think for himself, to put protection above obedience. And Tzeentch used that against us. He looked at Kelvan. Get this ship to Terra. The War Master's forces are moving, and we need to stand with the Loyalists. But first, Captain, make sure every warrior in this Legion understands. We serve the Emperor, not because he's righteous, but because the alternatives are worse. We fight not because we're weapons, but because we choose to be protectors. And if anyone else feels tempted by Chaos's promises, they come to me first. I'd rather execute them myself than watch them damn themselves. Understood, my lord. As the Astral Sovereign resumed course toward Terra, Andros stood alone in his private chambers. The weight of 8,000 deaths pressed on him, sons he'd killed or failed to save. Theron's last words echoed, I just wanted to protect. So had Andros, and in trying to be something other than the Emperor's weapon, he'd created vulnerabilities Chaos had exploited. Maybe Guilliman had been right. Maybe weapons that chose their own targets eventually turned on their wielders. Or maybe, and this was worse, maybe choosing made you vulnerable in ways blind obedience never could. The heresy was teaching him terrible lessons, and the worst was learning that sometimes being right didn't matter. Sometimes surviving mattered more than being good. In the grim darkness of the far future, even fathers killed their sons. The Shadow Crusade carved through Imperial space like a blade through flesh, and Andros learned that even victory could feel like defeat. 6 months after the purge of the traitors aboard the Astral Sovereign, the Astral Wardens had been assigned to interdiction operations against the Word-Bearers and World-Eaters as they prosecuted their campaign of genocide across Ultramar. Lorgar and Angron, two brothers Andros had barely known, were burning worlds in a ritual meant to summon something vast and terrible from the warp. Intelligence suggested they sought to manifest demons on unprecedented scale, to turn entire sectors into hellscapes where reality itself became negotiable. The Ultramarines bore the brunt of the assault, their realm under direct attack. But Guilliman had requested assistance from all loyal legions capable of void interdiction. The Astral Wardens, specialists in disrupting supply lines and rapid strike warfare, were perfect for bleeding the traitors through guerrilla actions rather than direct confrontation. Andros stood on the bridge of the Astral Sovereign, studying tactical displays showing the Shadow Crusade's advance. Every world the traitors touched died, not conquered, not occupied, but murdered. Billions executed in rituals meant to feed the Chaos gods, cities transformed into offering sites where blood ran in rivers and screams powered sorcerous workings. Target Convoy Delta 7, Andros ordered. Word-bearers supply train carrying ritually significant materials toward the Calth cluster. Hit them hard, take what intelligence we can. Deny them resources. The Astral Wardens struck like ghosts, Thunderhawks deploying boarding parties onto Word-bearer transports while the traitors were still realizing they were under attack. Andros led the assault personally, unwilling to ask his sons to face corrupted brothers while he remained safe. The Word-bearers fought like zealots. Their armor bore scripture in languages that hurt to read. Their weapons were blessed by dark powers, and they died praising gods that ate souls while laughing about it. The false emperor's loyal dog, a word-bearer champion, bellowed, his Crozius Arcanum crackling with warp energy. Lord Lorgar prophesied your interference, Primarch. The gods already know your fate. You'll burn on Kalth with all the other blind fools. Andros's power sword met the Crozius in a shower of sparks. The word-bearer was skilled, enhanced by Chaos's gifts, empowered by faith in entities that were objectively real. But Andros had been fighting empowered fanatics since his ranger days. Zealotry made you predictable. He feinted high, struck low, and Spiral Edge opened the word-bearer from hip to shoulder. As the traitor fell, Andros pulled data slates from his armor, intelligence on convoy routes, ritual schedules, target worlds. "My lord," Kelvin reported over Vox, "we've taken the convoy, but there's something here, a holding cell, survivors." The survivors were 19 Imperial Army soldiers, supply troops captured weeks ago during the word-bearer's advance. They should have been executed immediately or sacrificed in rituals. Instead, they'd been kept alive in conditions that barely qualified as survival. "Why keep prisoners?" Andros asked the dying word-bearer champion. The traitor laughed through blood-flecked lips. "Lorgar's orders. Every enemy soldier we capture, we keep alive until the Great Summoning. Their deaths will be meaningful then. We'll feed the rituals properly. Until then, we let them contemplate the gods they rejected." Andros executed him with a single shot. The 19 survivors stared at him with eyes that had seen too much. One, a sergeant whose uniform identified her as Cadian, saluted with shaking hands. "Lord Primarch, Sergeant Caney, Cadian 301st, we're ready for reassignment." She was lying. They were broken, traumatized, barely functional, but they were still trying to serve, still attempting to be soldiers despite weeks of captivity that had shown them exactly what the traitors worshipped. "Medical Bay," Andros ordered. "Get them treatment, food, rest, then we'll see about reassignment." Over the next weeks, the Astral Wardens conducted 17 more raids. Each one bled the Shadow Crusade's logistics. Each one delayed rituals by days or weeks. Each one saved handfuls of prisoners or evacuated populations from worlds marked for sacrifice. It wasn't enough. For every convoy Andros destroyed, 3 reached their destinations. For every ritual he disrupted, 5 succeeded. For every 1,000 people he saved, millions died screaming prayers to gods that answered with torment. The mathematics were brutal and unyielding. The Astral Wardens, even fighting at peak efficiency, couldn't stop the Shadow Crusade. They could only slow it, could only save fragments while watching the whole burn. "Lord Guilliman requests our presence at Fleet Rendezvous Point Tertius," Kelvan reported. "The Ultramarines are preparing a major counteroffensive. He wants all available Loyalist forces." Andros studied the tactical display. The rendezvous point was 3 weeks away at best speed. During those 3 weeks, the Shadow Crusade would burn another dozen worlds. But if the counteroffensive succeeded, it could break the traitors' momentum entirely, could save hundreds of worlds. Immediate action versus strategic patience. Save thousands now or millions later. "Set course for the rendezvous," Andros ordered, "but launch continuous raids along our route. We'll save who we can while positioning for the larger battle." What followed was a running campaign of desperation. The Astral Wardens hit target after target, supply depots, ritual sites, evacuation routes. They pulled civilians from doomed worlds, knowing they could save perhaps 10% before the traitors' main forces arrived. They disrupted summoning circles, killing corrupted psychers mid-ritual, even as demons materialized around them. Sergeant Caney, recovered enough to serve, volunteered for every operation. "My world died while I was in captivity, my lord," she explained. "Cadia still stands, but my regiment is gone. Let me fight. Let me make their deaths mean something." Andros approved her return to duty. Not because it was kind. Her psychological evaluations suggested she was using combat as therapy, which was dangerously close to the World Eater's madness. But because refusing would have been crueler, would have told her that her suffering had broken her beyond usefulness. The grim calculus of the heresy, sometimes using broken people, was kinder than protecting them. 3 weeks later, the Astral Wardens arrived at the rendezvous. Guilliman's fleet was massive. Ultramarines, Imperial Fists elements, Raven Guard survivors from Istvan, White Scars raiders, and others. Tens of thousands of loyalist space marines preparing to strike the Word-Bearers and World Eaters with coordinated force. Guilliman himself transmitted directly to Andros. "Your interdiction campaign cost the traitors 3 weeks of schedule. 3 worlds survived that would have burned. Well done, brother. 3 worlds, against dozens lost, against billions dead. Is it enough?" Andros asked. Guilliman's expression showed the same exhaustion Andros felt. "It's never enough. We save who we can, brother. We fight where we can make a difference. And we accept that we cannot save everyone. That acceptance is what separates us from our traitor brothers. They believe they can remake the galaxy by embracing chaos. We know we can only protect fragments of it by holding the line." The counter-offensive launched within days. The Astral Wardens led the Void Assault, their hit-and-run expertise perfect for disrupting Word-Bearer fleet formations. They bled the traitors in 1,000 small engagements, never committing to pitched battles they'd lose, always withdrawing before the World Eater's berserker fury could overwhelm them. It was effective. It was efficient. It saved countless lives by preventing the traitors from establishing secured logistics, and it felt like cowardice. Sergeant Caney approached Andros in the Astral Sovereign's strategium between operations. "My lord, permission to speak freely? Granted. The troops are saying we're running, that we're hitting and withdrawing while the Ultramarines do the real fighting. They know it's tactically sound, but it feels like we're avoiding the hard battles." Andros looked at her, at this mortal soldier who'd endured Word-Bearer captivity and still wanted to fight. "Do you think we're avoiding hard battles, Sergeant?" "No, my lord. I think we're fighting the battle we're equipped for. But humans aren't always logical. We want to see enemies die, want revenge for what we've lost. Your strategy is brilliant, it's just unsatisfying." "War isn't supposed to be satisfying," Andros replied. "It's supposed to be effective. We save more lives fighting smart than fighting angry. But you're right, it doesn't feel heroic. It feels like logistics and mathematics." "Welcome to the real horror of the heresy, Sergeant. We're fighting a war where tactical brilliance saves fewer people than we lose to strategic inevitability." The counter-offensive succeeded in its immediate goals. The Shadow Crusade's momentum was broken. Lorgar and Angren withdrew to regroup. Dozens of worlds were saved from immediate destruction, but the ritual damage was done. Across Ultramar, reality was weakened, warp storms grew stronger, demonic manifestations became more common. The Word-Bearers had lost battles but achieved their strategic goal, corrupting the Imperium's most stable realm. As the Astral Wardens counted casualties and prepared for the next campaign, Andros realized something terrible. The heresy wasn't a war that could be won. It was a war that could only be survived. Every victory was temporary. Every world saved today could fall tomorrow. Every brother Primarch who turned traitor took knowledge, resources, and power that the Loyalists couldn't replace. "First Captain," Andros said to Kelvan, "how many sons have we lost since Istvan?" 12,000, my lord. The purge, combat casualties, and disappearances combined, we're down to 60,000 battle-ready warriors. 60,000 from 80. 25% casualties in less than a year. At this rate, the Astral Wardens would be extinct before the heresy ended. And how many people have we saved? Kelvan hesitated. Difficult to calculate, my lord. Conservative estimate. 3 million civilians evacuated. 12,000 Imperial Army soldiers recovered from traitor captivity. 40,000 prevented from being sacrificed in rituals. Perhaps 10 billion lives saved indirectly through supply interdiction, delaying traitor advances. Numbers that should have felt like victory. But against the backdrop of entire sectors burning, of the Imperium tearing itself apart, of gods literally manifesting to devour humanity, it felt like throwing cups of water at a sun. Then we keep fighting, Andros said. We save who we can. We bleed the traitors where we can, and we don't let the mathematics make us despair. Because the moment we accept that it's hopeless, chaos wins. But privately, Andros wondered if chaos had already won. If the heresy's real victory wasn't conquering Terra, but breaking the spirits of those who fought to defend it. In the grim darkness of the far future, even the victors lost. Terra burned, and Andros stood at the Eternity Gate, knowing this was where the Imperium would live or die. The siege had raged for months. Horus's traitor legions, Sons of Horus, World Eaters, Death Guard, Emperor's Children, Word-Bearers, Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Alpha Legion, and Thousand Sons had brought war to humanity's cradle with a fury that shattered continents. The Imperial Palace, a fortress complex the size of entire nations, held against impossible odds. But holding meant dying by millions, meant watching defensive lines collapse and reform closer to the inner sanctums, meant accepting that every dawn might be Terra's last. The Astral Wardens had arrived 3 weeks into the siege, their fleet battered from running the traitor blockade. 58,000 Space Marines remained of the original 80,000, the rest dead in purges, void battles, and desperate interdictions across the heresy's years. They were assigned to Void Dock defense, holding critical approach vectors that fed supplies and reinforcements into the palace's depths. Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, had briefed the Loyalist commanders with characteristic bluntness. We cannot win. We can only delay until the Emperor acts. Every hour we hold is an hour closer to whatever final gambit he plans. Fight like it matters, because it's all that matters. Now, standing on fortifications built from the bones of traitor titans and melted ceramite of fallen brothers, Andros watched the Iron Warriors' siege engines advance. Perturabo had brought the full fury of his legion's expertise, artillery that could crack void shields, trenches that ran for kilometers, mining operations that threatened to collapse entire sections of the palace from below. Lord Primarch, Kelvan reported, his armor scorched by plasma burns that would have killed a mortal. The Iron Warriors are targeting structural supports for Dock 17. If it falls, we lose resupply capacity for this entire sector. How long until collapse? 4 hours, maybe 6 if the supports hold better than projected. And reinforcements. The Imperial fists are engaged across 12 fronts. The Blood Angels are holding the ultimate gate. The White Scars are conducting mobile defense of the outer walls. We're alone, my lord. Alone. 58,000 Astral Wardens against an Iron Warrior siege force, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, backed by traitor guard regiments, corrupted titans, and demon engines that screamed as they walked. The mathematics were impossible, but Andros had learned to fight impossible mathematics over the past years. We're not defending the dock, Andros announced. We're attacking their siege engines. His command staff stared. Kelvan spoke carefully. My lord, that's suicide. The Iron Warriors have overlapping fields of fire, layered minefields, kill zones designed specifically to annihilate counterattacks. Perturabo built these positions to be impregnable. Which is why he won't expect us to attack them, Andros replied. The Iron Warriors fight methodically. They calculate casualties, plan logistics, build perfect sieges. But they're predictable because perfection requires consistency. We're going to be inconsistent. He activated the tactical display. 3rd through 7th chapters will conduct frontal feint, loud, obvious, drawing attention. 1st and 2nd chapters deploy via Thunderhawk to their rear positions, target artillery and ammunition depots. 8th through 15th chapters hit their flanks in coordinated waves, forcing them to redistribute forces. We won't hold ground. We'll break their rhythm, destroy their timetable, and withdraw before they can adjust. We'll lose thousands, a captain said quietly. We'll lose everyone if that dock falls, Andros countered. At least this way we're choosing how we die, attacking, not waiting for walls to collapse on us. Sergeant Caney, promoted to lieutenant after valor in a dozen battles, stepped forward. The Imperial Army garrison requests permission to support the assault, my lord. We've got 30,000 troops in this sector. We're not space marines, but we can carry explosives. We can throw ourselves at positions. We can die so your sons don't have to. Andros looked at this mortal woman who'd survived Word-Bearer captivity, who'd fought through the entire Shadow Crusade, who'd followed the Astral Wardens to Terra itself. She was offering to lead 30,000 mortals to their deaths, to save space marines who could take punishment. She couldn't. Permission granted, Andros said, but you're not throwing yourselves away. You're conducting precision demolitions under Space Marine covering fire. We die together or not at all, Lieutenant. That's how the Astral Wardens fight. 6 hours later, the assault launched. The Astral Wardens and their mortal auxiliaries charged into kill zones the Iron Warriors had spent weeks perfecting. Artillery fire turned entire companies into red mist. Minefields detonated in chains that swallowed platoons. Autocannon emplacements fired until their barrels melted, killing anything that moved. And Andros led from the front, spiral edge carving through Iron Warriors who'd once been brothers. These traitors wore armor decorated with chaos sigils, their gene seed corrupted by years of warp exposure. But they were still Perturabo's sons, methodical, disciplined, perfect siege warriors. Perfect, predictable, vulnerable to chaos. The Astral Wardens didn't fight like other legions. They broke formations mid-charge, shifted targets without orders. Adapted faster than the Iron Warriors could adjust their perfect firing solutions. It was the megaship's tactical philosophy applied to ground warfare, unpredictability as weapon, adaptation as armor. Lieutenant Caney led her mortal troops directly into artillery positions, carrying melta charges that turned siege guns into slag. She died when an Iron Warrior heavy bolter cut her in half, but not before detonating charges that destroyed 3 artillery batteries. Thousands died like her. Mortals and space marines, Imperial soldiers and Astral Wardens, all bleeding into Terra's poisoned soil to buy hours against the inevitable. But it worked. The Iron Warriors' timetable shattered, their perfect siege disrupted. Dock 17 held, supplies flowed, and the palace's defenders gained another day. Rogel Dorn himself visited the Astral Warden's positions afterward. The Praetorian studied Andros with eyes that calculated everything. Unconventional tactics, high casualties, but effective. You bought us time we desperately needed. At the cost of 8,000 sons, Andros replied. 50,000 left. At this rate, the Astral Wardens won't survive the month. None of us will, Dorn said bluntly. The Emperor is preparing something. He's withdrawn to the inner sanctum. Whatever he plans, it requires us to hold, so we hold. We spend lives like currency because that's all we have left to spend. Is it worth it? Andros asked. Fighting for an Imperium that's dying regardless of who wins. The Emperor entombed, the Primarchs dead or scattered, the dream of unity shattered. Even if we survive, what's left? Dorn's expression didn't change. Survival, the continuation of humanity, even if diminished, that's always been worth dying for. The Emperor taught us that, even if he taught us little else worth keeping. After Dorn departed, Andros stood among his dead. 8,000 Jean's sons, Lieutenant Caney, and 30,000 mortals, all dead to buy hours in a siege that would last months. Kelvan approached. The Emperor has issued summons, my lord. All Primarchs are to attend him in the inner sanctum. Something's happening. The inner sanctum was a place of power that made Andros's enhanced senses scream warnings. The Emperor sat upon a throne that hummed with barely contained energy. Not yet the golden throne of myth, but something that clearly drew power from sources Andros didn't want to examine too closely. Sanguinius stood at the Emperor's right, his wings bloodied, his noble face showing exhaustion that went beyond physical. Dorn flanked the left, stoic as always. Jagatai Khan paced like a caged predator. And Gilliman studied tactical displays with desperate intensity. "My sons," the Emperor said, his voice carrying weight that suggested he was maintaining multiple realities simultaneously. "Horus comes. He will challenge me aboard his flagship. This confrontation is inevitable, prophesied, necessary. I will face him alone." "Father, no," Sanguinius began. "The angel knows his fate," the Emperor interrupted. "As do I, as do all of you who will stand at the Eternity Gate when Horus's elite attempt to reach this sanctum. You will hold, you will die if necessary, and you will ensure that no matter what happens in my confrontation with Horus, humanity survives." He looked directly at Andros. "You question whether this Imperium is worth dying for, whether my vision justifies the ocean of blood we've spilled. You're right to question. The Imperium I built is imperfect, brutal, perhaps doomed, but it's humanity's only chance. The alternative is extinction or eternal slavery to chaos. Imperfect survival beats perfect damnation. Remember that when you hold the gate." The Emperor stood, and reality bent around him. "Horus has sent terms. Single combat aboard the Vengeful Spirit. I go to end this heresy the only way it can end, with one of us dead. Hold the palace. Protect Terra. Give humanity a future even if it's not the one I promised." He was gone, teleported to his final confrontation, leaving his sons to face the consequences of choices made 10,000 years of planning ago. Sanguinius looked at the assembled Primarchs. "He's right. Horus will send his best to breach the gate while the Emperor is engaged. We stand here. We hold. We don't let them reach the sanctum." "Even if it costs everything?" Andros asked. "Especially then," Sanguinius replied. "That's what it means to be a Primarch, brother. We were made to spend ourselves in humanity's defense. This is simply the bill coming due." Within hours, the assault began. The traitors threw everything at the Eternity Gate. Demon Primarchs, Chaos Champions, corrupted Titans, legions of traitor Space Marines empowered by warp gifts. The Loyalists met them with desperation and fury. The Astral Wardens held the approaches, their hit-and-run expertise useless in static defense, but their determination absolute. 50,000 became 40,000, became 30,000 as the hours ground on. Andros fought until Spiral Edge's power field failed, then fought with the broken blade, then with his bare hands when even that shattered. And through it all, the question echoed, was this worth it? Was an Imperium built on lies and maintained through tyranny worth 50,000 sons' lives? Worth the millions who'd died in compliance actions? Worth the billions burned in the heresy? Andros didn't know, but he fought anyway because the alternative was letting chaos win. And he'd seen what chaos did to galaxies. In the grim darkness of the far future, sometimes you fought not because you believed in victory, but because surrender was worse. The heresy ended not with triumph, but with ashes, and Andros learned that survival could be its own form of defeat. The Emperor had slain Horus, but the cost had been everything. The master of mankind was entombed upon the golden throne, his psychic might burning 1,000 psychers daily just to maintain the Astronomicon. Sanguinius lay dead, killed by Horus before the final confrontation. Ferrus Manus had fallen at Eastvan. Thousands of years of planning, 20 Primarchs engineered to lead humanity's ascension, reduced to this: a dying emperor, scattered sons, and an Imperium that would spend the next 10 millennia slowly collapsing under the weight of its own brutality. Andros stood in the ruins of the Eternity Gate, surrounded by the dead. 22,000 astral wardens remained from the original 80,000. Not enough to constitute a functioning legion by any reasonable standard. Enough to have stories told about their sacrifice, insufficient to matter in the Imperium's future. Robut Guilliman approached, his armor scored by attacks that should have killed him. The Lord of Ultramar carried data slates, always the administrator, even in the aftermath of galaxy-spanning war. The Emperor lives, after a fashion, Guilliman said without preamble. He cannot speak, cannot move, perhaps cannot even think as we understand it. But his power maintains the Astronomicon. Humanity can still navigate the warp. The Imperium can survive. At what cost? Andros asked, gesturing at the dead. Half the legions turned traitor. The other half bled to remnants. Terra itself is scarred beyond recognition. Billions dead. For what? So we can maintain an Imperium that's becoming the very tyranny we claimed to fight. Guilliman was silent for a long moment. I've been drafting the Codex Astartes, doctrine for the reformed Space Marines. The legions will be broken into chapters, 1,000 warrior formations instead of 100,000 strong armies. It's necessary. The heresy proved that legions are too powerful, too vulnerable to corruption. Single commanders with absolute authority over hundreds of thousands of transhuman warriors. That's how we get Horus. You're punishing loyalty for the crimes of traitors, Andros observed. I'm ensuring it never happens again, Guilliman corrected. Your astral wardens will be split. Your gene seed will found new chapters. The 21st Legion as an entity will cease to exist. You'll be allowed to command one chapter, 1,000 warriors. The rest will forge their own identities, carry your legacy without being bound to your person. Andros felt something break inside. His sons, the warriors who'd searched 30 years to find him, who'd bled across the crusade and heresy, who'd stayed loyal when corruption tempted, they would be taken from him, split into fragments, their identity as astral wardens erased in the name of preventing future rebellions. And if I refuse, then the alternative is your legion's dissolution entirely, Guilliman said. Absorption into other chapters, your gene seed distributed without your input. The Codex Astartes is not negotiable, Andros. The High Lords of Terra, who will govern while the Emperor is incapacitated, have already approved it. This is the new reality. Adapt or be dissolved. The Emperor wanted us to be different, Andros said. That's why he made 20 unique Primarchs instead of 20 identical copies. Now you're erasing that diversity in the name of standardization. I'm saving what can be saved, Guilliman replied. And for the first time Andros heard exhaustion in his brother's voice. The Imperium is dying, Andros. The Emperor's vision is dead. The Great Crusade is over. All I can do is build something that might survive the next 10,000 years, even if it's not what any of us wanted. The Codex isn't perfect. It's just better than the alternative. He extended a data slate. These are proposed second founding chapters from your gene seed. The Void Wardens, the Crimson Rangers, the Star Protectors, the Korovian Guard. 22 chapters from your Legion's remnants. You'll command the Astral Wardens, 1,000 warriors of your choosing. The rest will build their own traditions. Your legacy will live on, even if not in the form you preferred. Andros took the slate, reading names and heraldry that reduced his sons to administrative units. And the traitor legions? Those who fled to the Eye of Terror are beyond our reach. We'll hunt the stragglers for centuries, but the bulk escaped, will fester in the warp, will return someday to threaten us again. This war isn't over, brother. It's just entering a new phase. One where we're weaker, diminished, barely holding on, but still holding. Kelvin found Andros hours later, staring at Terra's bloodied sky. The first captain had survived the siege, though his armor looked held together by will alone. The Legion is assembling, my lord. They're awaiting your orders for what comes next. There is no Legion, Andros said quietly. Guilliman's Codex will split us. You'll have to choose, Kelvan. Command one of the new chapters, or stay with me as part of the original Astral Wardens. Either way, we'll never fight as a unified Legion again. Kelvin stood silent, processing this. Will you accept the Codex, my lord? Do I have a choice? Andros asked. The Emperor's entombed. The Imperium's being restructured by administrators who never fought in the heresy. Primarchs are being told to accept limitations or be declared problematic. Guilliman's right. Adapt or dissolve. So we'll adapt. But you don't agree with it. No, Andros admitted. I think we're institutionalizing mediocrity, enshrining fear of power into doctrine, and guaranteeing the Imperium will stagnate for millennia. But I also think Guilliman's trying to prevent the next Horus, and I don't have a better solution. Sometimes you accept the terrible choice because refusing makes it worse. He turned to face his first captain. Gather the Legion. I'll address them one last time before we become chapters. They deserve to hear this from me, not from administratum functionaries who see them as statistics. 22,000 Astral Wardens assembled in the shattered plaza before the Eternity Gate. They were exhausted, wounded, diminished, but they stood in formation with pride that years of bleeding hadn't broken. Andros addressed his sons, his voice carrying across the plaza through Vox amplification. You've heard the rumors. The Codex Astartes will split the legions. The Astral Wardens, as you've known them, will cease to exist. You'll be assigned to new chapters, forge new identities, serve new commanders. This is not punishment. This is survival. The Imperium we fought for is dead. What remains is something smaller, harder, more brutal, but it's still worth defending. He paused, searching for words. I was a ranger before I was a Primarch. A protector who chose my team, who fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The Emperor made me a weapon, gave me you as tools to wield, but you were never tools to me. You were my sons, my legion, my responsibility, and I failed you. Lord Primarch, you... Kelvin began. I failed you, Andros repeated. 8,000 turned traitor because I taught them to question. Thousands more died because I chose tactics that prioritized saving civilians over operational efficiency. We're down to 22,000 because I couldn't find a way to win without spending your lives. That's on me. He looked across the assembled warriors. The Codex will split you into chapters. Some of you will stay with me. Most won't. But regardless of what chapter you serve, what colors you wear, what name you carry, remember this. You are astral wardens. You fight to protect, not just to conquer. You question orders that violate your conscience. You adapt instead of rigidly following doctrine. And you remember that being a weapon is a choice, not destiny. The plaza was silent except for Terra's poisoned wind. The Emperor protects, Andros said. Or so they say. But I've learned the Emperor demands we protect ourselves, protect each other, protect humanity despite itself. So that's what you'll do. In whatever chapter you serve, whatever wars you fight, you'll be protectors. That's the Astral Warden's legacy. Not void warfare doctrine or tactical brilliance, just the simple refusal to become the monsters we fight against. He saluted his legion. It's been an honor serving with you. Dismissed. The Astral Warden saluted back, 22,000 fists striking ceramite in unison. Then they dispersed, preparing for the fracturing that would create 22 chapters from one legion. Kelvan remained. I'm staying with you, my lord, the original Astral Wardens. Whatever 1,000 you choose to keep with you, I'm one of them. Even knowing the Imperium will never be what we hoped? Andros asked. Especially then, Kelvan replied. Someone needs to remember what we were supposed to be. Might as well be us. In the following months, the second founding proceeded. The Astral Wardens, now 1,000 strong, took their place as a Codex-compliant chapter. 21 successor chapters formed from the Legion's gene seed, each carrying fragments of Andros' teachings into the long war that would define the next 10 millennia. Andros watched them depart for their assigned crusades, his sons becoming strangers wearing familiar faces. The Void Wardens, the Crimson Rangers, the Star Protectors, all of them carried his blood, but none of them were truly his anymore. They belonged to the Imperium now, to the grinding machinery of eternal war that would consume them generation after generation. Guilliman departed Terra to shore up Ultramar. Dorn remained, fortifying the palace for sieges yet to come. Jagatai Khan vanished into the webway, chasing Drukhari raiders. Leman Russ went hunting for the traitor Primarchs. Vulcan, Corvus Corax, the surviving loyal Primarchs scattered, each finding their own way to cope with the Imperium's transformation into something none of them had wanted. And Andros, the Red Primarch of Kurova, commanded his 1,000 warriors and wondered if survival was worth the price. The Great Crusade was over. The heresy was ended. And all that remained was the Long War, 10,000 years of slowly dying, of holding the line against extinction, of being precisely the weapons the Emperor had created them to be. 50 years after the siege of Terra, Andros stood alone on Kurova's ruins, the first time he'd returned since becoming a Primarch. The world was still dead, the cities still charnel houses, the orbital platforms still shattered tombstones. But the Imperium had built a shrine here, to the Primarch who'd returned, to the Gene Sons who'd searched, to the last stand that had birthed a legend. Pilgrims came from across the sector, praying to saints that never existed, worshipping the Emperor as a god despite his hatred of such devotion. The Imperial cult had risen in the heresy's aftermath. Lorgar's vision of the Emperor as divine had proven ironically prophetic. With the master of mankind entombed and silent, humanity needed faith. The ecclesiarchy had formed, spreading the imperial creed to every world. The very thing the Emperor had tried to prevent had become the Imperium's foundation. Andros found bitter humor in it. The Emperor had fought to deny gods, had built an empire on reason, had created Primarchs to enforce atheistic truth. And 50 years after his entombment, he was worshipped across 1,000,000 worlds as the God Emperor of mankind. Perhaps Horus had been right about one thing. The Emperor's vision was always doomed to fail. "My lord," Kelvan's voice crackled over Vox. The astropaths report warp storms gathering in Segmentum Obscurus, possible Traitor Legion activity. The High Lords request the Astral Warden's response. "Tell them we'll deploy within the week," Andros replied. "Same as always. We respond, we protect, we hold the line. As you command." Alone again, Andros touched the ruins of the gene lab where he'd been born, or reborn, or remade, depending on which story you believed. The Administratum had sealed most records of his true origin. Officially, he was simply another lost Primarch, scattered by chaos and recovered by loyal sons. The truth, that he was from another dimension, another reality, transformed by the Emperor's genecraft into a weapon that remained classified, known only to those who'd seen his earliest records. Perhaps it was better that way. The Imperium had enough mysteries without adding trans-dimensional Primarchs to the list. He wondered sometimes what had happened to his Rangers, his team, his real family. Were they alive in another dimension? Had they moved on? Did they remember Andros the Red Ranger, or had his disappearance erased him from their timeline entirely? No way to know, no way to return. He was bound to this galaxy now, to the Astral Wardens who carried his gene seed, to the Imperium that demanded he be a weapon instead of a protector. But he'd learned to be both. In the 50 years since the heresy, the Astral Wardens had fought in 100 campaigns. They'd saved worlds the Administratum had written off. They'd shown mercy when doctrine demanded execution. They'd adapted when orthodoxy insisted on rigid compliance. And they'd survived, diminished, scarred, but still fighting, because Andros had taught them that being a weapon didn't mean abandoning humanity. The galaxy stretched vast and terrible around Terra. The Eye of Terror pulsed with malevolent power, vomiting traitor legions and demon hordes into real space. Orc empires rose and fell. Eldar craft worlds danced through the stars, following prophecies no human could comprehend. Tyrannid hive fleets lurked beyond the galactic rim, waiting to devour everything. Necrons stirred in tomb worlds, ancient and implacable. And through it all, the Imperium endured. Not through hope. Hope was for fools in this nightmare galaxy. Not through righteousness. The Imperium had abandoned any pretense of moral authority. But through sheer bloody-minded refusal to surrender, through generations of soldiers who died holding the line, through the grim acceptance that survival mattered more than dignity. Andros understood now what the Emperor had tried to create, not a utopia, not a better future, just humanity's continuation, purchased with oceans of blood and maintained through brutal necessity. The Imperium was terrible, but the alternatives were worse. A new astropathic message arrived, Orc Wah, threatening the Kalith sector. The world Andros had saved through compromise instead of conquest, the precedent that had earned him censure. It needed defending again. It would always need defending. That was the nature of the long war. You never won. You just delayed the next loss. "Prepare the fleet," Andros commanded. "We deploy for Kalith Prime, again." As the Astral Sovereign prepared to enter the warp, Andros took one last look at Kurova. His home world, his grave, his beginning. He'd been Andros the Red Ranger once, a hero who chose to protect, who believed in hope, who fought alongside teammates he'd called family. Now he was Andros the Red Primarch, a weapon who'd learned to pretend at protection, who'd watched hope die along with billions, who commanded sons engineered to die for causes they'd never fully understand. The transformation should have broken him. Perhaps it had, but broken weapons could still cut, and broken Primarchs could still fight. The galaxy was vast and uncaring. The Imperium was brutal and dying. The long war stretched ahead for 10,000 years of darkness, and somewhere in that darkness the Astral Wardens would fight. Not because they believed in victory, but because surrender was worse. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But Andros had learned that even in endless war, even in a galaxy without hope, you could still choose to protect rather than just destroy. That choice wouldn't save the Imperium. It wouldn't redeem the Emperor's sins. It wouldn't resurrect the billions who'd died in compliance actions and heresy battles. But it meant something to the people saved, to the sons who followed his example, to the memory of a ranger who'd once believed heroes could make a difference. And in the grim darkness of the far future, even that small meaning was worth fighting for. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. More stories await,